Okay guys, we're starting. Last lecture today is a guy who's running his own coffee shop and roastery somewhere up north from here. He won the title of World Barista Champion after a few attempts and World Cupping Champion. He has published a few books, 2 books about coffee, and he recently bought a coffee farm in Colombia. For me, he's just the Sherlock Holmes of coffee. You know, have you seen these new series about Sherlock Holmes in this present century? The way, so I think this guy, he could pick up, you know, a defect in a coffee and know that, okay, this bag was dropped on the truck that was going down from the farm and it was picked up by the next one. You know, he would be able to smell that. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Wendelboe.
Cheers. I have to do this quite fast. I've been studying soil biology for the last year or so. I've also been reading a lot of books on biodynamic farming, organic farming, also learning a lot about conventional farming through Yara. I have a project with them in, I think, Tamana, where we're researching different fertilizers. But today we're going to focus on organic farming and the ins and outs of that, because there's a lot of mystery to biodynamic farming, for instance, where people dance around cow horns with dung in it during the full moon, playing drums. I'm not going to talk about that. So let's get started. This is a beautiful picture, because it's a picture of a Norwegian forest. It's an old growth forest. We can pretend it is, it's actually not. It's actually a farmed forest. There are only 1 to 2 species of trees here. Pines, mainly. And the sort of Christmas tree stuff. Looks healthy. Never been fertilized. So we have monoculture. One of the most productive growing systems in the world. And never been fertilized. In terms of production, we're not talking about fruit or anything, we're talking about the production of organic matter. So why is it that this can be healthy without fertilizer, and a coffee farm cannot sustain itself without fertilizer? A coffee farm is normally a monoculture, coffee trees, maybe some banana trees, some shade trees, so we have a few different species, just like here. Very dense, concentrated farm, yet the trees are not able to survive. That's what I'm going to talk about today. What is soil? We think of soil as the stuff we stand on in nature, if we haven't pavement on and so on. But soil is actually defined. It needs to have mineral content, which is normally sand, silt, or clay, which is basically small rocks, smaller rocks, or the smallest rocks. So a clay would be very small and sort of dense. Organic matter, which means some kind of plant material that is degrading or not being degraded. Organisms, the mysterious microorganisms we all talk about but don't understand. And abiotic factors, what does that mean? That means temperature, moisture, and so on. That's the definition of soil. The top picture here would be soil. You would call this soil, but it's not, because it's missing one thing. It's missing microorganisms. The organisms is not there. So if we take away one of these, we don't have soil. We have something else. We call it dirt. So we have dirt and we have soil. Soil contains biology, organic matter, minerals, and so on. Dirt doesn't have the biology. Biology can be many different things. I'll show you a little bit about that, but from what I've learned, you can divide it into 2 different sort of types of biology. You have the aerobic organisms that are good guys. They like oxygen, just like us. And you have the anaerobic ones that don't like oxygen. One can live with the other, but one will always dominate, depending on the environment. So, for instance, If you have a soil with a lot of oxygen, you will have a dominance of aerobic organisms. They will occupy and grow and have a party, but all of a sudden you have a lot of water coming, and the water is not able to drain properly. There's not enough oxygen for the organisms to grow. They will use up all the oxygen, so the anaerobic organisms will take over. What happens to the aerobic organisms? They don't die, they go dormant, so they fall asleep. And they can sleep for hundreds of years, and all of a sudden you have oxygen again, they will wake up. And then the anaerobic will go dormant. Very interesting. The problem is, with the dirt, you took away the organisms. Normally a coffee farm, when you start a coffee farm, you will cut down all the trees. Some people will actually plow the soil, tearing up everything that's in the soil, exposing it to sun, killing everything that's in the soil, and then you have the problem. Because you lose the nutrient cycling, which is normally made by the aerobic organisms. I'll explain a little bit about that. Because, for instance, aerobic organisms will produce ammonium. Ammonium is nitrogen that the plants can take up. And typically, you'll have like old trees, big trees, they like ammonium, shrubs and so on. There are also other forms of nitrogen, but I'm not going to go into all the chemistry. If you have anaerobic organisms, they will convert the nitrogen in the soil to ammonia, which is a gas. This gas will evaporate, and it stinks. You know how ammonia smells like. So meaning, if you have ammonium, you have nitrogen that the plants can use. If you have ammonia, the nitrogen evaporates into the air. Another very bad part about anaerobic organisms is that they tend to produce alcohol. How many of you have been to a coffee farm and you went to a washing station or something and there's a pile of coffee pulp laying around? How many of you? You all know how that smells like. It smells a little bit like alcohol, it stinks, because it's anaerobic fermentation going on. If you had an aerobic fermentation or digestion of this material, it smells sweet, like tobacco, bark, cedar. It smells wonderful, actually. So the problem with the anaerobic organisms, they produce alcohol. Plant roots are dissolved by alcohol. If you dip plant roots into alcohol, they dissolve, they become like a soup. So the problem is, if you have a soil with anaerobic organisms dominating, they produce alcohol. The roots will not touch the alcohol. And typically you will see this in the soil, the top soil being sort of aerobic and nice. And then maybe a meter or half a meter down, you have a compaction layer, because the rain compacts the soil. Maybe you drove a big truck over the soil or something. The soil becomes like concrete, and it rains, the water is not able to drain, so we have anaerobic factors, they produce alcohol. The roots are not able to penetrate. Also, when you have soil compaction and anaerobic conditions, if you have heavy rains like you typically have in the tropics, you have a lot of erosion, because the water is not able to drain down and be kept in the soil. So you'll see a lot of runoff of soil that pollutes rivers and so on. Well, this is a miniature coffee tree. Normally when we think about coffee trees, we just think about the top part, the green part. But now that I've read a lot about biology, I understand that the plant also has roots, and the roots are quite important to a plant. What happens, what the plant does, which is magic, is it can utilize energy, light from the sun, and carbon dioxide in the air, throw the oxygen away, and bind all the carbon to chains, like sugar chains, long chains, and so on. It actually uses these carbons to leach out through the roots into the soil. And actually, if you look at coffee shrub, between 60 to 80% of the energy produced by a coffee plant is actually going down to the roots. 50%, so half of that energy, meaning maybe 40% of the plant's energy, are leached into the soils as exudates. Exudates sounds very technical. It's basically liquid with carbon, protein, and sugars. So my professor that talks a lot about this says that's a recipe for cakes and cookies. You have flour, sugar, and eggs. Cakes and cookies. What these exudates does is they attract microorganisms. So bacteria, for instance, they like very simple sugars. Bacteria are rich in nitrogen, but the plant cannot use the bacteria for anything. I'll explain a little bit about that. If the plant needs more complex chemicals like, let's say, phosphorus, it'll leach out more complex sugar chains. Bacteria cannot eat that, but the fungus can. The fungi are able to extract other nutrients from rocks and so on, from the soil. So let's say we have the perfect soil. It's aerobic, fungus and stuff, they bind soil together, creating small air pockets, so the water can drain and so on. You have earthworms creating pockets. How deep can a coffee tree grow? Downwards. Well, we don't really know. I don't really know. When I will go to coffee farms, people or agronomists don't typically say the roots of a coffee tree go down 1 meter and then they go sideways. That's probably because at 1 meter they have a compaction layer, the roots are not able to penetrate. I've seen pictures of grass that has 10 feet of roots going straight down in good soils. Weeds typically have very shallow roots and put all their energy into producing seeds and organic material. They just want to grow and reproduce. So they typically like anaerobic soils or dirt. So if you have poor soils, you'll have a lot of weeds. If you have good soils, the weeds don't like it there. So weeding, I don't have to do that in the future, I hope. So how this biology works is the plant actually knows what kind of food it wants. So if it wants pizza, it'll call the fungi and say, hey guys, I'm up for some pizza. They will come and deliver the pizza. He delivers sugar as money. So the plant, through the photosynthesis, leaches these exudates, or the sugars, attracts bacteria and fungi to eat those, and then you have something called protozoa, mysterious word, like amoebas and flagellates. You have nematodes, you have arthropods, like small little beetles. They will eat the fungus and the bacteria, and when they poop, that's when the nutrients are available for the plant. So for instance, a bacterial feeding nematode will have to eat maybe 30 bacteria to get energy enough. A bacteria is like 1 nitrogen and 1 carbon molecule. Let's put this simple. But the nematode doesn't need 30 nitrogen and 30 carbon molecules. It only needs 1 nitrogen and then 30 carbon. So what happens when you eat too much of nitrogen? Well, you poop it out. And who wants that nitrogen? Oh, the plant. The plant really wants that nitrogen. So that's how this kind of symbiosis works. Typically you have fungal eating nematodes that eat the fungus that releases more the phosphorus and all the other kind of minerals. The bacterial ones are there to release nitrogen, and so on. Make sense? So this chart here is actually written by the professor I'm learning from, Dr. Elaine Ingham. She has made this for the USDA. It's on their webpage. This is how the soil food web works in the soil as we know it today. This is based on research done in the 80s, published in the late 80s. And her paper is actually not hers, it's her husband's. But she was co-writing it, and it's one of the most referenced papers when it comes to soil biology. So this is not something I'm making up, this is actually science. Okay. Let's talk about conventional farming. And Yara will probably shoot me because I'm saying this, but we'll see what happens. Why does mineral fertilizer work? Well, first of all, you normally plant plants in dirt, so you don't have the biology there, because you plow the soil and so on. You kill the biology before you even started. Mineral fertilizers are salts. Salts tend to kill bacteria. What do we do to preserve food? We put salt on it. So you have more pathogens, because when you kill everything, and then there's, of course, the plant is still producing exudates, also through its leaves, not just through its roots. It will attract the pathogens, the ones that are growing fast, like the weeds of fungi, for instance, like leaf rust. They will grow faster. The beneficial fungi that protects the plants will grow slower. Typically, you will then have to add pesticides, so you kill even more fungus. If you spray fungicides, you kill all the fungus on the farm, not just the bad ones. You also kill the good ones. Herbicides, of course, you kill bacteria and so on. And then you have the system where it just gets worse and worse. You have to put more salts on, and you can't reverse it. Yes, you can reverse it, but not with this kind of system. You have to reverse it with biology. So you can argue in a conventional farming system, there is no taste of terroir, like you don't have a taste of soil. Because there's no interaction between the plant and the organisms, because the organisms are not there. So, depends on your coffee, like, is it grown in dirt or soil, whether you have the terroir flavors. So, I'm going to try to explain the benefits of working with biology that I've been told. Higher yields. Typically when a farmer says, well, I don't want to grow organic because the yields are lower. No, they are higher. The reason is the plant is fed 24/7, all the time, because it produces exudates all the time. Bacteria are there, the nematodes are there, everything is happening all the time. With a conventional farming system, you typically fertilize 3 times a year. And as a person, I don't know what my plant needs, and I definitely don't know what they need tomorrow, but I can sort of guess that they need nitrogen and phosphorus and so on. Higher quality, well, if the plant is fed all the time with better nutrients, yes, we predict higher quality. Lower costs. I haven't spent a dime on fertilizer yet, except my work hours. Less pests and disease, because interesting what Nora was talking about, worm tea, is you can actually produce a compost tea, we call it, where we actually grow organisms, and you can spray it on the leaves. The leaves produce exudates to get fed through the stomates in the leaves, and you have fungus growing on the leaves, you have bacteria. So if you look at a healthy plant with good biology, you will actually not be able to see the plant tissue in a microscope. You will only see microorganisms, because it's covered. And when it's covered with beneficial fungi and bacteria, there's no space for the pathogens like leaf rust to grow. Yes, there's food there, the spores might be there, but there's too much party going on. They're not invited. Better water retention, so right now my farm hasn't had water for 4 months, almost. Because my soils are really poor, my plants are suffering, but I'm expecting when my soil is fixed and good and aerobic, it will retain water, my roots will go deeper and actually be in contact with the water. So the drought will not affect me as much. Of course, everyone is affected by it, but less on these type of farms. And you will have less erosion, of course. But I have to prove it first. I'm not aware of anyone doing this in coffee, this particular type of working with biology. Of course, you have biodynamic, you have organic. Elaine Ingham is not aware of anyone working in coffee, but there's people working in wine, tomato, salad, anything, any crop, and it works. You just need to find the right balance for your type of plant, because a salad will not need the same microorganisms as an old tree, for instance. So what I have to figure out is, what kind of organisms do I have to have dominant in my soil for my coffee trees to thrive? That's going to take me a long time, be a big challenge. I suspect that coffee needs a lot of fungus in the soil because it grows naturally in a forest, and typically a forest soil is very fungal dominated. Actually, about 75% of the soil, topsoil, is fungus in an old-growth forest. So I suspect that I need more fungus than bacteria. Of course, you need bacteria as well, but you need to have a dominant population of fungus. And we're talking about, in 1 teaspoon, we're talking about billions of bacteria as a minimum in healthy soil, and lots of fungal hyphae. So it's not like you just have one fungus here and so on. So to create more fungus in my soil, I have to make compost, obviously. Compost is not a fertilizer to put nutrients on the soil. It's actually inoculum for bacteria and fungi to grow. And fungi typically like to eat woody material. Bacteria cannot digest woody material. So I have to find brown leaves, straw, cardboard, paper, wood, wood chips, parchment, all these kind of woody things. And my compost is about 60% of this kind of material right now. Fresh green stuff, like leaves, grass, will typically grow a lot of bacteria. We need bacteria as well, because my soil is very poor, so we have to use around 30% of that. And then around 10% cow dung and coffee pulp. High nitrogen food for the party to get started. If you have too much of this, your compost pile will just go up in temperature and it might explode. So you have to be very careful about this. And use a simple thermometer to just monitor your compost pile. So you mix everything together with a lot of water. It needs to have around 50% water. You watch the temperature and you turn it if it comes close to 65, 70 degrees, because when the organisms are growing too fast, they will use up all the oxygen in the pile, and you will shift your beneficial aerobic organisms to anaerobic stuff that is poison for your plants. So if you have a compost that stinks, like coffee pulp or ammonia, do not put it on your plants. It's going to kill them. Slowly. The good thing about thermal compost is it's free. Well, I spend probably 2 working days to make 4 piles. That is enough to fertilize my whole farm. That's 2 working days just for one person. You have to find the right balance. So again, my coffee crop needs a different balance than if you're growing carrots or strawberries or something else. Needs to stay aerobic, so you need to watch the temperature and turn it all the time. Maybe 3-4 times as a minimum. Also, you need to get the temperature up for a while to kill pathogenic bacteria, like E. coli, for instance, if you're using cow dung. And also weed seeds, they tend to die after a high temperature for a long time. So you can actually just use temperature and smell the compost to see if it's healthy or not. It smells, I've never smelled that smell before. It's incredibly sweet and very, very complex. So it's a reference that's like burnt into my head now. Once you have the compost, the ideal situation would be to make enough compost to spread compost on your soil, so that the microorganisms can go down and they will have the compost to actually have food to eat, so they can get started and grow and so on. But I don't have time to make tons and tons of compost, because I'm only in Colombia maybe 10 weeks a year. But you can extract the compost into water. So normally I would use 4 to 5 kilos of good compost in 200 liters of water, extracted in a tea bag, just massage it, and then you spray it on your soil. Because you're spraying the microorganisms, that's what you want. You don't need the other stuff. There's more than enough organic food in the material in the soil for the organisms to grow. And also the plants are there producing the food for the organisms, so you don't really need to put the compost there, unless your soil is really, really poor. You can also use the same technique with an air pump. Put some additional foods like kelp or fish hydrolysate, which is basically a fish that is blended with water to grow more fungus, or you can use molasses to grow more bacteria. But then you need to blow air into the liquid because they're growing fast and you need to have enough oxygen there. Otherwise it turns anaerobic very fast. When the bacteria are growing, they're creating glues. So when you spray them on a plant, they will actually stick to the leaf surface. So for foliar application, compost tea with food, for the soil, compost extract, no food. Of course, the extract is much easier to make. You just extract and apply. This can go anaerobic. If you lose power, which you do on the farm, for 1 hour, the whole batch is ruined. You have to start over again. And you typically have to brew for 24 to 48 hours. Does it work? Well, I don't know. But this is one plant that I was monitoring when I was there now. We didn't have a lot of water, so it's hard to say because the bacteria won't grow that fast when you don't have moisture and so on in the soil. But this was the day when we applied our first compost extract, and this was 9 days later, the same leaf. Of course, the lighting and everything is not completely the same, but if you really analyze the leaf, you can see that it's more green, because it was really lacking nitrogen and also moisture. That's why it's yellow. Now it's more green because it's getting nutrients again, after one application. So I hope it works, otherwise I'm screwed. So let's just have a quick look at the microorganisms. You have these different ones. There are some more, but these are the main ones. This is what my soil looked like before I planted and also before I applied any tea or extract. So typically the small dots here, not actually that's just a line in my slide, microscope slide, so you can look through a microscope, light microscope with shadowing, and see the organisms. So these little dots are bacteria, not much diversity, they all look the same. There's some organic material, some bacterial aggregates when they go together and make a party. They sort of tend to bind stuff together. So very poor soil, almost no organisms. This is after one application. Here you have a lot of bacteria, of course some mineral particles as well in this slide, but you see there's like different rods, there's some small dots, some bigger dots, some fat rods, some small rods, so on. Much better, but we're not there yet. We're lacking fungi. This is a fungal hyphae, a beneficial one because it has dark color, it's kind of fat. We know this is beneficial fungi, but we don't have a lot of that in our soil. So this is actually a slide from my compost, not from my soil. So I need to make I have a lot of spores in my compost, but they're not growing, so they need food to be able to grow. I'll show you how a party looks like. This is a microorganism party. So this will be an amoeba, a testate amoeba that eats bacteria. Here's another one. Here's one amoeba producing another one, so they're reproducing. Here's an amoeba. This will be a fungal spore. All these kind of dots moving around, that's bacteria. So it's kind of a fascinating thing to do, sit and watch. You can spend hours on the microscope just watching this, looking for different things. Here's another little party. It's a loner, but he really has a great time. This is a nematode. And you can actually tell what kind of nematode it is if it only would lie still. So if this happens, you can put a lighter on so they sort of calm down a little bit. But based on how their mouth is, you can tell if it's a fungal eating nematode or bacterial eating nematode. You have root feeding nematodes, which you don't want. But you have some really good nematodes. One thing that I haven't filmed is typically a flagellate because they move around really fast, so it's very difficult to follow. And you have some anaerobic stuff that I don't want in my soil, like a ciliate, that are big, but you can tell the difference on the way they look. So just by using a microscope, I don't have to send my soil to a science lab to get all the mineral stuff, because my soil contains all the minerals that I need. It's just it's not in a plant available form. I have to have the microorganisms there to extract the nutrients from the rocks and so on, and be eaten by these guys to be producing the nutrients for the trees. So any soil around has enough nutrients, it's just it's not available for the plant. That was the biology 101. I've just been learning this, so there's no Q&A session. We have to have reach a boat. But I made a video of my farm project, and I hope you will follow it on Instagram. And yeah, Instagram is where we publish most of it. Yeah, so I'll show you the video. you want to learn more about this. There's some really good stuff. Soil Food Web is in NM's webpage. There's a great book, Teaming with Microbes. You can also Google this. There's some great YouTube videos out. There's a movie, Symphony of the Soil, that I highly recommend watching. And also the USDA has a great website about soil biology. Great.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much.